this exercise, you will learn how to create spaghetti cording. So I have my bias strip cut here, and it doesn't really matter the length for this exercise because we're just doing the sample. But this is, if you want to follow along, I'm going to make this, it's about 15 inches long. I'm actually going to cut off these angle ends so that I have square finishes. A little bit easier. And then I'm actually going to use my marking pen, and I'm just going to mark my face side. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this in half, face side to face side, and I'm actually just going to pin in a few places just to keep it folded. Maybe one about here. This doesn't really matter because you're not actually going to be following the cut edge. I just want to get this flattened so you can see what I'm about to do. So on one of these ends, let's do it on this end, this folded edge is actually going to be the side that you're going to judge your seam allowance with. So from the raw edge, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually ease into approximately from the folded edge about 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch to 3/16. But I'm going to go diagonal from the cut edge, and we're going to sew about this far. And then this distance, what is this? I'm doing about 3/16. We'll make it a little bit easier to turn. So if you can see this, I'm going to sew from this angle, from this point here, angle in toward my rolled edge, this amount here, 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch. And we'll sew all the way down. And we're actually going to be stretching this as we sew, and you'll see that in the machine when we start. Now, after you sew, be sure that you have one of these spaghetti turners in your kit, because you're going to need this to get it to turn. And we'll be using this after we sew this, and then we're going to trim it away. And then I'll show you how to insert this into the spaghetti to turn it. Okay, so we are ready to work on the spaghetti cording. And as you might remember, I have my bias strip cut, and I have folded it softly face sides together to match the raw edges here. And I have crudely drawn a line for how I'm going to start sewing this. Now I'm going to gradually come into this amount that is I've got marked here. So this is from the folded edge, okay? So this is actually going to be where we kind of judge from our seam allowance. So we want to be, at least 1/8 of an inch away from this edge. And that's going to be challenging because once we get from here, we're going to actually start stretching the bias. So I'm going to start sewing here and come gradually to that 1/8 of an inch. So get this in here, and I'm going to backstitch to begin. Okay, so now I'm at that spot, which is about 1/8 of an inch away. So I'm going to landmark right here on the middle of this side of the presser foot, and I'm going to watch this edge right here, the folded edge, meet that spot. So I'm not going to go, that's going to be kind of like where I'm going to keep my eye. So I've got the needle down, and now you can stretch. Do you see that stretching? I'm stretching it, and you want to stretch it out while you're sewing. And what happens when you do that is that it moves this to be smaller. We don't want this area to be smaller when we're sewing. We still want to keep it at 1/8 of an inch. So you see these other pins that I had pinned in here. I'm going to remove these because that will kind of slow me down. So I know that we're just folding it in half, and actually all of the excess, most of it, we're going to cut off. So I'm going to start sewing again, but I'm going to stretch this. Go ahead and stretch it as much as it will go, and then still follow the middle of this little presser foot arm right here. And you may have to pull from the behind to continue to get it to go through the machine. Okay, I've gone as far as I can. I'm going to stretch it again to continue sewing. Really be consistent with the width of this that you're sewing. And this may take a little bit of practice. Okay, I'm going to hold on to this at the bottom of the machine here, because I still want to stretch it. The idea of stretching it is because we really want to stretch the stretch out of it. So I'm going to backstitch here. This is important. Do a good backstitch at the end. Let's take it out. So we want to get the stretch out because, well, this is spaghetti cording, so it's most likely going to be used for like shoulder straps, and we don't want the shoulder straps to stretch as we wear it, right? So we've stretched it, we've sewn, we can kind of see it bowing. That's how we know it's stretched, right? So, and this is, pretty wide, so you could actually make it smaller if you want to, but you still got to make sure that you can get your turner in there. And that's the next step we're going to do. We're going to go to the pressing mat. We're not going to press it. We're going to trim it, and then we're going to start turning it. All right, so we've got our stitching done. Now we're going to trim it a little bit up here on this edge here. We're going to trim away this excess. And I think I'm going to start on this end. And you want to about less than 1/8 of an inch. If this is the width, you can see the width of the stitching. You want it to be slightly smaller than that width. So I'm going to attempt to make it maybe a fat 1/16 or a skinny 1/8. You don't want to get too close to the stitching because you want to make sure that when you're pulling it through that those stitches won't pop. And there's going to be a lot of pulling in this next step. All right, so can you see how much I trimmed off there? Okay, so next you're going to need your spaghetti turner. It's this long piece with a hole on the end and with a nice hook there. So you see that hook? That's going to hook onto the end. All right, so we're going to take this from this end, this funnel side end, and we're going to insert the hook, and we'll put this all the way through. Just push the fabric all the way through till you see the hook come out. Okay, and then we need to hook, we need to hook this hook onto the end of here. And you can see that I pushed it all the way out. What I like to do is I like to push this in here. I like to feel where this bar is. And you got to be careful with this bar because it will break off pretty easy. What I like to do is I like to get in there, I like to feel that and see if I can get that bar to poke through the fabric without breaking. Okay, so let's see. There we go. So it's poked through the fabric, and I like to do it right. I like to hook right here at the seam allowance where I've stitched the seam, right? So I'm going to hook that on. So it looks pretty good hooked. Now, don't get too excited because sometimes this will not, it will let go. And this is going to be the hard part that's to convey to you on what it feels like. So you will have a popping, kind of a popping feel when it turns in on itself. So what you're going to have to do is just kind of wiggle, and sometimes I will just kind of push a little excess fabric, hold it about here so no other fabric can be pulled. And I just kind of like to pull with my fingernails to see if I can get this end, the end that's not sewn on, to turn around over on top of that seam allowance. Kind of, I do this wiggling at the bottom sometimes while I'm kind of pulling. And then you see how all this fabric is up there. Try not to remove too much of that, and then try to push that over. Did it turn? Ah, I got it to turn. So once you feel that it's turned, right, you will have excess out here. The hook is right where my fingernail is. Now that it's turned, what you want to do, and I got some extra fabric down here I was holding on to. Once it turns, you should be able to pull that fabric right over. And of course on camera this is not working. Here we go. You will feel it go through your fingers and then turn. Don't release any tension on the width of it, because if you do, you may lose that hook in there. And what you can do, see if I can, I'm just kind of pulling this, do a little bit at a time. Try not to put too much strain on that end, and then you'll be able to pull it out. And if you can, eventually you'll be able to feel that at least half of it is coming through, and then you'll see that end that you had hooked onto kind of pulls out if the camera will focus. And then once that's done, I usually hold on to this and get rid of the hook, and hold on to this, and then I will pull the rest of this through. And just make sure that it's nice and clean. And then this is your spaghetti cording spaghetti strap, right? And that's actually a pretty good size. Now, we don't necessarily need to press this. We don't want it to be flat. We kind of like to have it with a little bit of body. Now, if you want to be really sure that all of the stretch is out of this, get this wet this, and then stretch it on maybe a board, and then nail it at either end and let it dry overnight, and that will assure that all of the stretch is out. We're not going to do that. Now, I'm pretty happy with this spaghetti, and if you got it to this stage, congratulations. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in assessment.